As I mentioned, my name is Jamie Linden. I work for the NDC Partnership Support Unit. We're really delighted to be holding this session today, led by GIZ as part of our NDC Enhancement Raising Ambition Through Partnership series. The session today will be looking at nature-based solution in climate action. And we have a really wonderful series with GIZ, UNDP, and World Resources Institute. This is our third session, and we're looking forward to hearing some really insightful presentations today. Next slide, please. Well, on the next slide, you'll see information on interpretation. And as mentioned earlier, we do have interpretation available today. Please select the globe icon on your screen and select your preferred language. Interpretation is in French and Spanish. We also welcome your comments and questions. We would be delighted for you to introduce yourselves in the chat and to say hello and where you are joining us from. And so the chat is open for you to give your welcome and hello. As we start today's session, I will give the floor to Michelle Peña-Nels, who will be providing our opening remarks, and then we will hear from our distinguished panelists today. So Michelle, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope technically you can hear me all. So we are very pleased to host today's session, not only because of its importance in terms of the topic itself, but also due to the long-standing cooperation between the GIZ and the NDC partnership. As one of the implementing partners, GIZ has been engaged with the partnership since 2017 on behalf of the German government, and since 2021, the GIZ is an institutional member of the NDCP, and since then has directly contributed with its experiences and portfolio in the areas of climate change mitigation and adaptation in around 120 countries of the partnership. So our membership also underlines GIZ's commitment to ambitious climate action, an issue that is already integrated into around 1/3 of its portfolio. Today's topic is one of the key topics of this portfolio, and we're very excited to actually be able to share our insights. And I hand over to the colleagues, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So we will start today's session with a presentation by Harold Bosak, Senior Advisor of the Global Project on Strengthening National Implementation of Global Biodiversity Targets. Harold, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And in my former life, I have been leading the global project on mainstreaming ecosystem-based adaptation. This is a global project led by GIZ and financed by the German Ministry for the Environment. And it has been a program on the borderline between the climate change community and the biodiversity community. And what I'm talking about today is a little bit on synergies between mitigation, adaptation, and biodiversity, and focusing as well as the title of this event suggests, the NBS nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. Yes, just some few words on the biodiversity side. The biodiversity has an international legal instrument, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, which is one of the three Rio Conventions. And the main goals of this convention are the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. The convention has a very important instrument for implementation, which are the so-called NBSAPs, and in full length, National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans. And we can say that these NBSAPs are equivalent to the NDCs of the UNFCCC climate community. And within this setting, nature-based solutions are measures of implementing the NDCs and the NBSAPs, and of course other sectoral policies under the common heading of acting in harmony with nature. They are based on the conservation, restoration, and sustainable management of ecosystems. They take into account the social and economic dimensions, and they give us a perspective on just transition, leaving no one behind. Next slide, please. Well, and in December of last year, we had our Paris moment for biodiversity. The new Global Biodiversity Framework has been discussed at the COP15 in Montreal. And this new Global Biodiversity Framework sets the scene for the next decades. We have been discussing several cross-cutting issues as backgrounds to the specific targets. There has been a holistic view on environmental problems, breaking up silos between sectors and respective conventions. There was a whole of government approach, cross-sectoral. We have a whole of society approach, including governments on different levels, civil society, academia, and the private sector. And we had a special reference to the participation of IPLCs, indigenous peoples, and local communities. Next slide, please. Don't be afraid, I won't go through all of this, but this is just putting together the main goals and action targets which have been agreed upon in this conference. We have 4 goals for the GBF to reach in 2050, and for the next decade we have 23 action targets which are our guiding principles for the next, let's say, 7 years until 2030. And you can just put them together under 3 headings: reducing threats to biodiversity, meeting people's needs, and tools and solutions for implementation and mainstreaming. And if you look at the target 8, biodiversity and climate change is one of the most important targets to have synergies between the conventions in the upcoming decade. Next slide, please. Well, there were a lot of action targets, as I already said. Just to remind you, there was one very famous 30 by 30 target, conservation and management of at least 30% of world's lands, waters. There was one important target on restoration, on at least 30% of degraded lands, inland waters, and coastal and marine ecosystems should be restored. We have a target on the reduction of nutrients and the elimination of plastic pollution. We have, which regard to the private sector, a target on disclosing risks, dependencies, and impacts on biodiversity. Next slide, please. We have a target on halving global food waste, just to reduce our global footprint of consumption. We would also have to reduce or phase out or reform subsidies that are harmful to biodiversity by at least 500 billion US dollar per year. And we have a financial target as well, mobilize at least 200,000 billions per year in domestic and international biodiversity related funding, which would be or which would sound familiar to the climate change community who is discussing climate finance. So next slide, please. This was a really exciting event, and in the first sessions we were discussing within our program that it would be very interesting to have a new publication on synergies, because we were at a very special moment. We had the updated NDCs, now which have been discussed as well in Sharm el-Sheikh, with more and more detailed content on adaptation. We have now the new Global Biodiversity Framework with new targets, and all of the NBSAPs would have to be updated. And we thought that it would be very interesting to follow an approach to learn from the updated NDCs for the next update process for the NBSAPs. And we started an analysis of NDC cases, and we linked them to the GBF, the first draft, but we updated them as well after the final decision and the adoption of the GBF. Next slide, please. Yes, we wanted to focus on special cases. The analysis and selection criteria were we would focus on an ambitious NDC target. We would focus on key sectors like water, agriculture, and cities. We would include the social dimension in our analysis, and we should also include the potential negative interactions. I will come back to this a little bit later. Next slide, please. We picked up the NDCs from Pakistan and Jordania. In Pakistan, the NDC highlighted the building of resilience to climate change through ecosystem-based adaptation for integrated flood risk management. A very important issue, as we had the hazards last year. And we linked them to the GBF because we have links to ecosystem restoration. We have a link to hazard reduction and to mobilize financial resources. On the Jordania case, we took up the case of the Amman, the capital resilience strategy. And the NDC says that increasing the adaptive capacity of cities could be reached and accomplished by planting trees and creating green spaces. And in the new GBF, we also have a mentioning on human health and well-being in urban areas, the integration into planning at all levels of government, and these are very important cross-sectoral items in both documents that can be interlinked. Next slide, please. As a result of our analysis, we said that the synergies that we can have between climate change and biodiversity are go much more or beyond the concept of co-benefits. They require a systemic perspective. And there really is a difference between adaptation and mitigation with regards to biodiversity. And we should address as well maladaptation risks, because there are not every measure in the adaptation community isn't harmful to biodiversity and to the social dimension, which has to be included as well under the perspective of climate and biodiversity justice. So the GBF presents a window of opportunity and to check the NDCs for synergies and for especially looking at the nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. Coming back to our global program, some key facts. We were working during 8 years of performance, and the main goal was strengthen the ability of decision makers at all levels to mainstream ecosystem-based adaptation into policy and planning processes. We had some core tasks. We were working on concepts, methods, instruments for mainstreaming. We gave technical inputs in the context of the UN negotiation processes. We had pilot projects in partner countries, and we were focusing on knowledge exchange to EBA policy advice and implementation. Next slide, please. We have been working with several international knowledge networks, some more related to practitioners as the EBA Community of Practice, others like the Friends of EBA, more related to decision makers and international institutions. And we had a special focus as well on disaster risk management and reduction, combining adaptation and DRR. Next slide, please. We had a lot, or we published a lot of publications, more than 40. All of them are available at the adaptation community. Next slide, please. We were just selecting very successful solutions in the partner countries on EBA and working together with the Panorama network, the Panorama community. And we have currently more than 180 solutions which can be consulted within this Panorama platform. Next slide. We have been working on an EBA e-learning course, which is what was a collaboration between IUCN, IISD. We have, this is a self-paced learning course that you can enter. We have central content units, and we have some additional modules on gender, communication, local knowledge, and or governance. It is available in English, French, and Spanish. And since the launching of this training course, we have more than 4,000 participants. Next slide, please. Another key issue was the topic of climate justice in EBA. And there's a special connection to the discussion on NBS, because there has been a lot of criticism on NBS in the context of COP26. and we addressed it to look a little bit deeper into the connection between justice aspects and EBA. Next slide, please. So looking a little bit on adaptation and biodiversity, or climate change and biodiversity, we have on the climate change or adaptation side, the discussion on the global goal on adaptation. We have the discussion if 50% of climate finance would go to adaptation. We have more adaptation measures in the NDCs, and we have the recognition of the IPCC Working Group 2 RE6 report on the effectiveness of EBA and NBS. And on the other side, biodiversity, we have the new GBF. All of the NBSAPs have to be updated, and we established as well a new NBSAP accelerator partnership, which is a partnership similar to the NDC partnership. This has been launched in Montreal at the COP and is being set up, and we hope that in the future we will learn from the NDC partnership and we will have the same success as the NDC partnership. Next slide, please. So just having a look on EBA and NBS in general, as I already said, the IPCC AR6 just mentioned the effective ecosystem-based adaptation, reduction and to risks of people, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. And EBA can be treated as a subset of NBS. And this was as well the position that we took and our ministry took, that EBA is a subset of NBS. That means that all EBA approaches are natural-based solutions, but not all nature-based solutions are EBA. So the EBA debate, from our point of view, is more advanced. We have technical guidelines, studies, project communities already exist, and we are looking forward to use this range of experiences and of guidelines for the discussion on NBS in general. And I think, yes, I'm coming to an end with this. Next slide. Just thank you for your attention. I hope it was fruitful and to see the linkages between the two communities and the necessity of synergies between the climate change community and the biodiversity community using NBS. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Harold. That was a really, really wonderful presentation. I think the overview of looking at the new Global Biodiversity Framework, the 4 goals to 2050 and the 23 action targets, a really useful background and knowledge base for our attendees. And I think something that stood out to me was looking at the need to mobilize at least 200 billion per year in biodiversity related funding, something that we see across all areas of climate action, but very useful to hear that the quantities have been identified and gives us a target to aim for. Very excited to share the e-learning course with our participants. We will circulate that in the follow-up email to everyone who has registered. So for those of you who are interested, you can watch the recording and hear this session again, but also explore that resource as well. Very much interested in hearing more from the NBSAP partnership as that gets off the ground and makes progress. And we, as you said, the increase in momentum needed for biodiversity-related action is really important, and appreciate the distinction too that not all nature-based solutions are ecosystem-based adaptation, but that there is this really technical foundation to the ecosystem-based adaptation. So I actually started the course a couple of weeks ago, and I'm excited to dive into it more following the session. We'll take a few minutes here to do some questions and answers before we get into our next presentation. We have a few questions already that have come through, and for those of you who are in our audience, please go ahead and share additional questions via the Q&A function, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. The first question that I would pose to you comes from an anonymous attendee, but they are asking, how should we close the gap between answering biodiversity and climate problems, especially in countries which are struggling to achieve their NDC alone, and in addition to that, its biodiversity target?
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is a very good question and difficult to answer. But I would say that the situation that we have NDCs and NBSAPs and other national action plans for the other Rio conventions, this is really a very difficult task for many countries to address them all. And this is another reason to have most of possible synergies between these documents. And if we start doing this between NDCs and NBSAPs, I think this would solve a big range of problems for people in the countries which move with limited resources. And I think we should go forward on searching synergies and putting things together, because at the end, on the ground, people don't care if it's NDC, if it's NBSAP, if it's NBS or EBA, or they just want to solve their problems. And we should just streamline a little bit our international efforts to do this.
Thank you. Completely agree. The importance of streamlined and integrated plans is really useful for climate action. An additional question we have, and I think you touched on this in your presentation, so perhaps they're looking for a bit of elaboration. To what extent are Indigenous communities and knowledge systems involved in your data research and evaluation considerations?
Yes, this is a very important topic, has been a very important topic for us. I mentioned the climate or the justice perspective, and we addressed really in our publications these issues. We have a special publication on the participation of IPLCs, of indigenous communities and local communities within the environmental discussions, not only the climate change, but also biodiversity. And I would like to stress again that IPLC participation was one of the cross-cutting topics of the COP15 on biodiversity. And we have a very special focus on this issue in the upcoming handling of the NBSAPs. They are really key, and we know that most of the problems can be solved with the ancient strategies of indigenous people. We know that, but we have to put it in practice, and we have to address the decision makers to really put it into practice and to acknowledge it.
Thank you very much. I have two more questions quickly for you, and then we will move to Sophie's presentation. The question we have related to your previous comment on synergies asks, are there any studies or assessments quantifying the synergies in achieving global climate and biodiversity goals in an integrated manner? Are you aware of any, or is this something that we need in the climate space?
Not yet, as far as I know. What we did is just putting up the topic and stressing the necessity to do it. What we didn't, we don't have quantified results on this, but this is really a key issue for the future, because if we don't have the proof of the importance of synergies, we won't have them. And really, this is for the upcoming years to have studies and so on. As far as I know, I don't have any very strong data on this. Maybe our colleagues in the UN organizations have some hints, but we still don't have.
Well, thank you very much. We have one last question, and I'll attempt to summarize it here, but it's related to the mobility of financial resources, and particularly looking from movement from the Northern Hemisphere to the Southern Hemisphere in terms of damage and losses, looking at resources needed for implementation of adaptation and mitigation projects. How, in your view, what can those who are implementing or donor agencies do to better prepare to meet and support country needs, and in particular around the area of finance mobilization?
Yeah, this is a very controversial issue, and we know that the pledges were made, but the money didn't arrive yet. This has a lot of reasons, but one reason maybe is that we would have to really specify and work out the demand, the concrete demands, and put figures and numbers on it. And this is one point. And the other point is we have really a situation on where people have to just continue pressuring the Northern Hemisphere, let's say, to release these funds, because but this is a problem that we face in our countries or northern countries as well. We have pledges for climate adaptation measures, which are really in the phase of, or the stage of pledges, and very little implementation or slow implementation. And this is a very complex problem, and I hope in the future we have some better solutions than in the past.
Thank you very much, Harold. Very grateful for your presentation and for your answers to these questions. Next, we will pass to Sophie Krause, who is the component leader on forests, biodiversity, and ecosystems through the Euroclima Plus program. So, Sophie, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and very happy to be here and to present you the results of our study we as GIZ have conducted in the framework of the Euroclima Plus program on how our partner countries in the Latin American and Caribbean region include nature-based solution approaches in their nationally determined contributions, in their NDCs. And before starting with the actual content of my presentation, I would like to mention two words on the Euroclima program to those of you who might not know the program so far. So Euroclima is the flagship climate program of the European Union with the Latin American and Caribbean region. It is co-financed by the German Ministry for economic development and cooperation. And we as GIZ are one out of 8 implementing agencies implementing this program. What is worth mentioning in this context is also that Euroclima is already existing since 2016, and we have therefore had different program phases with different intervention logics. In our actual phase, we are identifying our concrete cooperation actions through so-called country dialogue mechanisms with our partner countries. And in this regard, we are very, very closely cooperating with the NDC partnership to ensure that we make use of all existing and possible synergies and to also avoid any duplications. So therefore, very happy to present our study also in this context and to you as an audience. Another fact that I would like to mention is that since beginning of this year, we have 33 partner countries, since we have included 15 new partner countries of the Caribbean region. Before and until end of last year, we had 18 partner countries, mostly in the Latin American region. Unfortunately, the new partner countries of the Caribbean region are not yet included in this analysis where the results are presented now. So this may be as a background information on the program, and now very happy to start with the presentation. So if you could skip to the next slide, please. I will essentially quickly inform you about what we defined as nature-based solution for climate actions and how we identified them in the NDCs and Latin American and Caribbean region. I will present you the results of our classification system, in which we analyze them according to essentially like 6 different characteristics, and also provide concrete examples and synergies with the biodiversity agenda. And then I will share with you our main outcomes and key messages of this study. So next slide, please. What we defined for nature-based solutions for climate action in the context of this study is measures aimed at conserving, protecting, restoring, and sustainably managing natural or modified ecosystems to mitigate, adapt to, or reduce the risks associated with climate change, while simultaneously providing human well-being and also benefits for biodiversity. So as you see, this is very closely and very similar to other existing definitions for nature-based solutions of IUCN or UNEA, for example. Next slide, please. In our analysis, we essentially browsed through the updated updated NDCs of our 16 partner countries. That were the 16 countries which have adopted their updated NDCs until June last year, June 22, to check for measures and commitments linked to this definition, our definition for nature-based solution for climate action, and also to specific ecosystem-related nature-based solution approaches, such as ecosystem-based adaptation, ecosystem-based mitigation, or ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction actions. And the outcomes of this first check was that every out of these 16 countries includes at least one nature-based solution approach in their NDC commitments. However, 10 countries, so these are the ones marked here in yellow, really explicitly mention and include nature-based solution as an approach, while 6 countries, the blue ones, include them implicitly. Next slide, please. We also, within this more general overview, we checked for concrete links and references to other international conventions. And we found that, again, out of the 16, 11 NDCs make a concrete reference to the SDGs, 5 to the Sendai framework, 2 both to CBD and the other Rio Convention, UNCCD, to combat desertification, and 1 to the Ramsar Convention on wetlands. Next slide, please. When we analyzed more in detail the nature-based solution approaches among the commitments, we found that most are linked to adaptation actions, 197, followed very closely by 176 approaches that strengthen the enabling conditions for nature-based solutions for climate action, and also a big share, 150 commitments related to mitigation actions. And in this regard, it is also very interesting to mention that a lot of the commitments contribute to both mitigation and adaptation in a very synergistic way. Next slide, please. So examples from the countries for this type of general measure. I will pick the example of Chile for mitigation. So for example, Chile commits to the sustainable management and recovery of 200 hectares of native forests, which accounts for a substantial amount of greenhouse gas sequestration per year. Next slide, please. When we had a closer look in the different subcategories of enabling conditions, which we have defined as contextual circumstances that increase the feasibility of climate change adaptation and mitigation approaches, we created like 6 different categories and found that the vast majority is related to the strengthening of policy, institutions, or governance mechanisms, while there's also many approaches related to information systems and technologies or to spatial planning instruments, their capacity building measures, and also actions and commitments related to financing instruments and to research. Next slide, please. One example from a partner country is that, for example, Cuba is strengthening the monitoring and early warning system of critical ecosystems of the country and the services they provide. So this would be one example for this. Thank you very much. And next slide, please. The actions on the ground, we had a closer look on to what subcategory they belong to. And we again created like these 6 subcategories. So sustainable management of ecosystems, conservation, protection, and restoration of ecosystems, the 3 like more common and already established ones. But then we found that also quite a lot contribute to a combination of these first 3. So for example, the restoration of ecosystem and the sustainable management. And there's also some related to the creation of new ecosystems. So for example, the creation of artificial wetlands, and some that combine artificial and natural ecosystems. So for example, artificial wetlands related to the sustainable management of water catchment areas. Thank you very much. And next slide, please. One example of such an action on the ground is, for example, Costa Rica for an action related to sustainable management. The country said that by 2030, 1 million hectares of forest cover, including secondary growth forest, will have been managed sustainably to avoid land degradation and to also conserve biodiversity. Thank you very much. And next, please. No, there should, well, at least I see a question and answer slide now. There should be other slides following.
Sophia, I think we're having a technical challenge with the presentation. Let me make sure that we have the full slide content there. Our apologies. Thanks for your patience, Sophie. I think I have the slides ready. Just a moment. Yep, I will go ahead and share screen here. Thanks for your patience on that one. We should use that. Is this the right slide?
Thank you. Perfect. Yeah, that's the next slide. So in addition of having a look like on the concrete commitments, we also checked to which sectors they are related to. And we found that really the majority is related to a multi-sectoral approach. So even though we find a lot of commitments linked to the more classic nature related sectors such as biodiversity, forestry, and also agriculture, or water management, there are a lot which are related to more than one sector, and also quite a few related to not that common sectors such as energy or waste, for example. Next slide, please. One example for such a sector would be, I pick Argentina, which where the commitment is to strengthen the adaptive management of natural resources with an ecosystem-based approach to ensure the conservation and also the sustainable use of biodiversity, including terrestrial and also aquatic ecosystems. So there we can clearly see the link to also the biodiversity agenda. Thank you very much. And next slide, please. Another set of characteristics which we have analyzed is potential ecosystems for the implementation of nature-based solutions on the ground. And there again, we found that a lot of actions could be implemented in more than one ecosystem, so in multiple ecosystems, though again, the rather classic ones such as forests or agro-ecosystems, marine and coastal freshwater ecosystems are also very well represented. Thank you. Next, please. One example of a commitment in a specific ecosystem would be Guatemala in the marine and coastal ecosystem. So the country said that by 2025, at least 1,500 hectares of mangrove ecosystems are restored and reforested with the full participation of local communities, indigenous people, women's group, and youth. And this directly links me to the next criterion, which we have analyzed in detail. Next slide, please. Which is the reference to marginalized groups when looking at nature and the NDCs. So out of the 16 NDCs analyzed, we unfortunately found that only 9 make a direct reference to marginalized groups in nature, while for 4 NDCs, the reference is pretty weak. So there is a general reference, but no details are provided, and 3 NDCs do not directly mention their involvement or participation at all. So next slide, please. The last category which we have analyzed is if the nature-based solutions provide a potential benefit for biodiversity. And we found that for 75, yes, there would be a potential net gain in biodiversity via these nature-based solutions approaches. We fortunately did not find a single approach in where it would be clear that there would be negative effects for biodiversity. However, for also a big number, a huge number, like 73 approaches, we found that it is defined still very broad and not detailed enough. So the net gain for biodiversity really would depend then on the implementation on the ground. And this brings me to my last slide, sharing a bit our conclusions and outcomes. So we found that, in the NDCs, they already incorporate a lot of enabling conditions and nature-based mitigation and adaptation actions, and there is a great potential to provide biodiversity benefits if they are effectively implemented or if they are like slightly adjusted to ensure these benefits. We also found, as presented, that the nature-based solution commitments for climate action can be implemented in various development sectors and also various ecosystems. And this, especially in the Latin American region, is very key in combating climate change and also biodiversity loss. And the last important outcome of our study is that we strongly advocate that the implementation of robust nature-based solutions, in addition to positive results for ecosystems and biodiversity, would have to ensure the active participation of marginalized people and groups such as women, indigenous people, and also Afro-descendants. Yeah, I think there is now the link to our study. We have the full report, both in English and in Spanish available, and also like short versions in English and in Spanish, and happy to share here or via the chat the link to all 4 versions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and thank you for your patience with our presentation technical difficulties. Very, very interesting to hear about the analysis of these 16 countries, and I thought it was really interesting in particular that some of the, in your analysis, that many of the actions benefited multiple ecosystems, and that was the most predominant category there. And I think for the partnership, looking at these different types of analyses, first of all, congratulations on a really fantastic report. And then the specific categories, for example, direct references to marginalized groups, something that as we look at NDC updates and enhancement and revision, for us to keep in mind and to keep front of mind in this process. For our participants, we will be continuing with our Q&A now, and very excited to have Sophie to answer our questions. I think the report overall has been shared in the chat, so we encourage everyone to please read that after the session. We have a question that has come through that asks, how do we communicate the synergies of nature-based solutions and NDCs, in particular to those who work in the field and with local communities? Would be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Sophie.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think communication always depends very much on the specific objective and the target group, right? So, and also on background knowledge already existing on NDCs and nature-based solution approaches. But I think an important aspect in this topic is that we definitely need to do and to get started, right? And to tackle the climate and the biodiversity crisis. And nature-based solutions and focusing on the benefits they provide, I think that is a good entry point to inform various different stakeholders and people in the field and on different levels in this regard.
Thank you, Sophie. Another question that has come through: how can policymakers and project developers encourage active participation of historically marginalized groups in nature-based solution measures? So beyond the direct mention in NDCs, what are you seeing on the ground?
Yeah. So we, for example, within Euroclima Plus, we really try to have this as a precondition already in identifying the cooperation actions in our first dialogue rounds with our partner countries. But then I think it is very important, as soon as it comes to the planification of actions on the ground, to really start integrative process and being open also to changes that might arise from this process.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions coming in, very interesting questions that have come from our audience. And we have the next being, what role do you see of the private sector to meet the NDC targets that are focused on integrating nature-based solutions? And so how can countries reach private organizations to help in developing nature-based solutions for the country's goals?
Okay, yeah, I think there is a lot of information already available on also the economic advantages of nature-based solutions compared to like gray infrastructure, for example, right? So I think the economic aspect often is a very valid argument, and I would hope that this is also convincing actors which are maybe traditionally not in a first case thinking of nature-based solutions. Another thing is the sustainability aspect. So there's also an interest, I think, yeah, to really identify again like the concrete benefits nature-based solution provide for also then the specific sectors, and presenting them accordingly will hopefully help. And there's, I mean, the approach is gaining more and more attention and also interest from the private sector. So, yeah, we hope that different actors are taking action in this regard.
Wonderful. Two questions, I'll ask them back to back because I think that they may tie into each other. The first being, what, based on your results, are the major constraints that countries are facing in implementing nature-based solutions? And then the second question that I think can build on this is, what further research is needed to better understand the potential of nature-based solutions, and how can this be integrated into policy and decision-making processes?
Yeah, a good question. I think again, it will probably help to, or many times also like financing problems are limiting the potential. So also receiving more funding options for the implementation of nature-based solutions will probably help, and getting like different sectors and actors on board. Sorry, the question is already disappeared.
No, no problem. The question was in looking also at what you think research gaps exist in terms of enhancing the potential of NDS and people's understanding of them, and integrating them into policy and decision making.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, nature-based solution consists of like some already well-established and well-known approaches, right? So I think there is a lot of research already done on these approaches and available out there. However, there are also very new and innovative approaches. And I think there we still need more research and more information and more data available regarding especially these new innovative approaches. So there, research and science, and yeah, that would most probably help a lot.
Great. One additional question is looking at nature-based solutions play a key role in protecting and increasing natural carbon sinks. However, carbon capture and storage technologies are also gaining more attention in the mitigation measures of countries. In your view, what role do carbon capture and storage technologies play in achieving medium and long-term GHG emission reduction targets? And for countries that may be looking at this approach in their carbon capture or in their mitigation targets, are there particular nature-based solution approaches that they should be considering as well?
Yeah. So in this regard, like we in our study, we did not consider nature-derived solutions or nature-inspired solutions, such as, like, for example, the utilization of windcraft or solar energy, or like the building of houses inspired by termite houses as nature-based solutions for climate action. That does not mean that since they do not have like a benefit for biodiversity as such, right, and do not support ecosystem integrity as such. However, I think there is a potential for these more nature-derived or nature-inspired solutions, especially if they're linked to other nature-based solutions, and if these benefits for biodiversity and for ecosystems are ensured in these approaches.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that covers all of the questions that we've received today. I want to say a huge thank you to both of you for your presentations, and we're going to share the recording with our participants today, and we will also be sure to circulate the reports as well as the course mentioned, and want to give a huge congratulations to both of you for the work that you have done in this area. It's really exciting to see. And we're going to move to our closing in just a second, but before I close, any final thoughts, any key messages that you would want our participants to take away, either Hal or Sophie or both of you?
Well, I think the necessity of synergies and of thinking together, climate change and biodiversity loss and measures, this should be one of the most important messages of this event as well. It has been addressed by the conventions, but only addressing is not enough. We have to put it into practice, and I think harmonizing the plans and the measures would be a very good step forward. And I'm looking forward to the future discussion on NBS. I think NBS can play a key role in this regard.
Wonderful. Sophie, anything key message you want participants to take away from the session today?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think really like using all the synergies available, right, among the climate and biodiversity agenda, especially, and trying to a bit breaking down the silos, right, and seeing like where there are co-benefits among both agendas, and ensure that there is no negative effects for biodiversity and the climate actions, and vice versa. I think this would really help in achieving and in tackling both climate change and the biodiversity loss.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. It was really wonderful to have both of you for our session today and for such an engaging conversation. I learned a lot and took a lot away, and am really grateful for your time and your work today. I want to thank our participants for attending the session, and we hope that you can join us for the next session of the Raising Ambition Through Partnership series, which will be on May 25th. You can register at the link on your screen, and we will also send the registration link by email to all who registered for the session. Our recording will be available on the NDC Partnership YouTube, and we want to say a huge thank you, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you, everyone, and take care.